I would get goal alignment with civil service by paying everybody who's on the Whitehall payroll against GDP per capita growth. Because at the moment, they get paid regardless. I mean, if the country doesn't grow, if we all get poorer, they still get paid. Get big pensions and all the rest of it. So just to drive some goal alignment and to improve the focus of Whitehall or Westminster on GDP per capita, I would put everyone's money where their mouth is and only pay people against that.
Andrew, if the fiscal situation, which is so bad already, is going to be corrected, there are going to have to be cuts, right? Big cuts.
Absolutely.
Where are they going to come from?
And just to be clear, I mean, the cuts should come from the fiscal situation that has been rising and no one's been particularly honest about for decades.
Right.
But they're also a morally good thing. I mean, we Conservatives believe in people keeping more of their own money. So even if it wasn't worries about the gilt market and all the rest of the things that are causing problems, we should still seek to spend every pound of government money as if it's our own.
Yeah.
Where are they coming from? Look, I mean, we've set out as a party £47 billion of cuts, which, I think people regard as a down payment, not the whole thing. There's more work to be done. Individual departments, I will be looking in Department of Business and Trade. It's not a huge department and it's not the oldest department, so it hasn't got a huge amount of spend in it. But there's absolutely cuts you can make in every department. Yeah,
so you're targeting red tape in particular. We posted a video of you with the chainsaw going through all the regulations, and that was the employment rights bill as well, wasn't it?
That was, blimmin' hell. That was 330 pages of employment. I had a standby chainsaw. We had Chainsaw 1, which is the one we used, and then for the purpose of making the video, we had a backup just because, it's not easy to take a chainsaw to that much red tape. And you talked about spending cuts.
Yeah.
The second big piece, so that's just the direct cost of government spending. The huge cost it puts on the economy is red tape. That's really, my day-to-day interactions with businesses are all about that. The employment rights bill, it's unbelievable. The government, literally, I don't know what goes through their mind. They are talking about red tape. Every 2 weeks, Rachel will make a speech and she will say, we're the government that's cutting red tape. This is $5 billion a year on the government's own impact assessment of massive red tape. It'll completely change the employment compact between workers and their firms, something that, Tony Blair didn't go and revisit, Gordon Brown. It's been a consensus for 30 or 40 years. And really damaging. Who's going to be hurt the most? The really smallest businesses and people who are trying to get their first job. I think we've got a little bit of a crisis of young people's unemployment or not being in the workplace creeping up on us anyway. But this bill absolutely runs the risk of ending up with the sort of Central European levels of youth unemployment.
So you mentioned the young people, right? So I think there are almost 1 million, or known as needs, right? So,
needs, exactly.
So not in employment, education or training.
Yeah.
Now, that has been creeping up for some time. What are the big ideas to help those people specifically? Because some of this was happening under previous Conservative governments as well. It's not a new phenomenon. It's ticking up.
Creeping up. Look, you've got to do some welfare reform because you've got to get to a point where it can't make economic sense for people to be on welfare, not, at that stage of their life. And if even within the continuum of 1 million young people, some may not be work ready, but many will. Then you've got to give employers the incentive to hire. Above all, that's a growing economy. The economy doesn't grow. We are in a sort of zero-sum cake. And you're right, that's been in most Western democracies now for quite a long time. So get rid of the sclerotic legislation, reform planning, other supply-side reforms, cheaper energy, all the sort of things that say to businesses, almost all of whom have a choice, right? The category error, I think, about Whitehall really for the last few decades is they have not appreciated the degree to which any business has a choice where to operate. And even if it operates a little bit here, it could outsource some of its functions to somewhere else in the world. So there's a blooming competitive world out there, and we've just tied ourselves up in knots. And then the third thing, I think there is a piece about employment. Whether it's IR35, a well-intentioned, I've no doubt well-intentioned, although a little bit more looking at tax policy from the view of HMRC rather than the lived experience of small business people or self-employed. We should all have the right, without being fully exploited, but we should all have the right to organise our affairs as we want. And some people, that was self-employment, choosing to work, different times for different employers. IR35, the rules and the general risk-averse culture we've got in society now, some of that's about the legal profession, just meant that most people, men in big firms, the public sector, just effectively clamped down on any form of self-employment.
But how do you do that? I know we don't have a fully formed policy on this yet. You guys are saying it's just a sort of signal of intent.
Yeah.
But you must think, well, like you said, the reason it was well-intentioned is it prevents employers from, and otherwise everyone's self-employed and there's no employment protections at all, no sick pay, pension.
It's a bit more about the tax authorities, actually. I mean,
but there is a consequence to scrapping it entirely, right? Would you accept that?
Look, first of all, we're going to reform it. We're not going to scrap it entirely.
Yeah, fine.
What IR35 was ultimately about was HMRC, who view many forms of life as evasion. I don't go through life believing that people are trying to evade their taxes. Of course, some do, but you don't destroy a whole ecosystem of self-employed, freelance contractors, people arranging how they want to live and work just because HMRC has a concern about whatever they call it, leakage, evasion, all the rest of it. So that was a bit more about tax.
Right.
The gig economy is a good thing. Again, in any human organization, sorry to be boring about this, but in any human organization, there will be compliance failures, right? We've seen massive compliance failures of people who should be policing people's right to work. Completely support the government in cracking down, doing what it takes. And you know what? You don't need a clunking digital ID card mandatory for every citizen in the UK for the Home Office to do what they should be doing, which is raiding nail parlours and barbers and drive-through car washes and the things that people would tell them are places that they may find a heavy preponderance of people who don't have full right to work. So, a lot of this is just making systems work as they should. The challenge we have, and you see it in many other domains, you see it with, the nanny state, health foodism, some of the food protection restrictions on advertising, even bans that some people advocated on smoking and vaping, that we're too willing to reach for the regulation lever. And the unintended consequence, do that, rinse and repeat for 20, 25 years. And bejesus, you've gummed up your economy. You're not getting the jobs. You're not getting the growth. You don't get the entrepreneurial spirit. And people have got a choice, which is why, tragically, not just the non-doms, the ones with, accumulated wealth, but a generation of young people are being pushed away. Not the good form of, going out across the Commonwealth and building railroads and bridges as we used to, but actually being pushed out of this country because they don't feel they've got opportunity here.
But that didn't begin in the last 12 to 16 months. This trend happened under the previous Conservative governments as well. I'm sure you've heard this criticism. In fact, you mentioned it in your conference speech. I just want to read you a little segment of it. You said, "We Conservatives know that it is only private enterprise that can create growth, not government. There are moments in office where we strayed from that truth. So more regulations, raising tax, the state as a nanny." So where were the areas in government that you think you made the party made the biggest mistakes in this area? And were you fighting against this privately? I understand there's collective responsibility.
Yes, I was. Look, I joined the Conservative Party age 14 under Mrs. Thatcher. Different leaders for different times, but what that period of the 80s and 90s did see a wholesale transfer of public costs, if you like, from the public sector into the private sector through privatisation programmes. A genuine re-gearing of entrepreneurship. So Lord David Young is my hero, right? He was Miss Thatcher's Department for Enterprise Minister. We like that name, by the way. And that really did genuinely improve the clock speed of our economy and get pride back into our country. So you see, as a proxy for some of my views and no doubt many other people's views, that's a good shortcut. And when you looked at where we were spending our time, the most precious thing you've got in government is time. This government's going to learn that pretty quickly if they haven't already. They're getting on for a third of the way through their viable term. Even Trump, they've got the midterms and things. So time is your precious commodity. What were we doing coming up with football governance regulators? Why was there so much time spent on, in my view, a flawed model of renters reform? And then again, a lot of the restrictions on high-fat, sugary food, it sounds worthy, but is that really the biggest challenge we face in society when we haven't grown? And all of my remarks, they're quite ecumenical. I mean, we haven't grown materially for a very long period of time. Our GDP per capita in the UK, tragically, is 30. So we are clinging there as a country in just about in the top 30 countries in the world. That is not a future I want for your children, my children, our grandchildren. We've got to fix that. And only through growth is doing that. Millet, I won't know all of the ins and outs, but he's a hero. Right, he's properly tackling some deep-seated problems.
Right. The
Argentinian economy is growing faster. It's almost every metric is better than the UK economy. Now it's coming from behind, but that's the pace cut.
Yeah, so Millet, that's an interesting comparison. So he's also got his chainsaw and he's going out for area to entire departments in Whitehall. Correct. Is that sort of territory you would like the next Conservative government, if you return to power, to push down that space? Would you cut entire Whitehall departments?
Look, I've got brilliant colleagues, in shadow cabinet, each in their departments are looking at what the right model is. I do know as a finance director, two things. And I was a finance director for 12 years.
Yeah, talk about that.
I know a little bit of what I speak, and you're never popular, by the way, as finance directors. You have to make peace with that. One is it's people that spend money. So if, as has happened, the size of Whitehall itself, which isn't the largest part of state spending, but if Whitehall itself, every department, has got about a third more people in it than 2016, they're all dreaming up ideas every day of either spending money or regulating. So if you have fewer people in Whitehall, the biggest benefit is not the direct cost saving, do save a few billions. Yeah. The biggest benefit is it reduces the activity and it forces those who are left to focus on what really matters. The second thing is you don't save big amounts of money by just top slicing, right? I mean, every organisation does this and it's sort of table stakes, but you can't just go through and say, credibly, we're going to take out 5% a year. In fact, that's what every government does. Yeah. And every government ends up with more costs than they started with. So you do have to ultimately say, we're going to stop doing some things. It's a bit early in the policy process to say that. In my own area, more on the regulation than spending. Yeah. I am looking actively, not yet fully baked, but I'm looking actively at how we completely dismantle the world of ESG and diversity. It's a big cost for companies. You look at an annual report, which no one ever does, by the way, but you look at the annual report and there's a huge amount of activity in there for that. Bank of England spending time spinning up internships exclusively based on the colour of someone's skin. That's just wrong, right? It's the character that matters. It's what people can do, not the DNA. Yeah.
Is some of this connected to provisions within the Equality Act? Can we trace it back to that?
I think you have to look at, and again, this is not to make policy, this is just to look at the field of play. Yeah. And the field of play would have to include the Equalities Act, the Human Rights Act, as well as the ECHR. Those three in combination are what has, in many cases, created issues. So I'll give you another quite offbeat example, but I'm obviously a district MP representing a rural area. The planning system will always be a point of contention. You're allocating scarce resources. But we have a two-tier planning system. There's a specific provision as a result of ECHR for Gypsy, Roma and Traveller. So it's a separate planning system. You have to come up with planning supply for both groups. Now, this is not to pick on any one community at all, sure. but it's another piece of complexity. It's another piece of regulation, and again has some deleterious consequences. It is a bit of a two-tier planning system. So I'll be speaking in my district later today, and residents will say, look, it's a two-tier system. If they go and put in for their, conservatory extension, it's one system. Yep. If a different community wants something, it's a different system.
What about net zero? Obviously, you're taking a different path as a party on net zero to the previous Conservative governments. But today, Boris Johnson has said we won't win the next election by bashing the green agenda. So is he right or wrong?
Well, we won't win the next election without a growth plan, in my view. I personally think the next election will be an economy election. It's one, stronger economy as well as stronger borders. And my focus within that for Kemi is stronger economy. So I think that's where we're going to win. And we can win as Conservatives. But to do that, we've got to have a credible plan. And I can't look business in the eye and say, look, we're going to have trade policies that remove trade frictions. We're going to have deregulation policies that allow you to hire people competitively. But by the way, we're going to leave your energy costs to be 4 times higher than your competitor. I don't think that's viable. I think you have to look at all of these things in the round. So it's not about bashing anybody else's policies, but for sure, we have to exploit our energy resources. We've got to stop again, using tax as a weapon to create a hostile environment to drive people who are exploring difficult domains like the North Sea offshore. And we've got to have enduringly cheaper energy costs.
We keep drawing back to your experience in business. So I'd actually quite like to talk about that. Do you think that business experience is helpful for politics? I mean, is there overlap? Have you learned things that you apply now in politics that you developed during your career at Sky, for example?
Yeah, I think, look, when when I was a minister in particular, and city minister, I was the financial secretary, whatever, I was responsible for the fortunes of the city. And you're not going to get the UK to grow if you don't get financial and professional services. So that taught me about what business taught me, and I brought to that, was setting goals, communicating them clearly, having a plan, trying to get some data, and then tracking progress against that. Now, those are sort of just business skills. They're quite transferable. But had I not had a 20-year, 25-year career in business before that, I might have been much less tough or directional with the Whitehall machine.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they're malicious. I don't think they rock up in the morning trying to do damage. Some of them will have some, views that won't necessarily accord with their ministers at the time. But as a minister, if you are able to give clear direction, perhaps a proper plan of reform rather than being a bit tactical, then the machine can respond to that. There's still things you could do to improve it, but I think I did bring some of that from my business experience.
Did you ever get frustrated because, mentioning the machinery of Whitehall, as a minister, you can't, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't sack directly those civil servants working for you. You can move them around. Yeah. But if someone's poorly performing in a business, you can move them on pretty quickly. So was that ever a frustration for you?
It was a frustration that I couldn't sack regulators.
Right.
Because regulation is a huge corpus of what makes an industry succeed or fail. And, culture beats strategy. So if you've got the tone at the top of regulators that's really quite antithetical, and the government has have some of the same issues. They've moved one or two people on, like at the CMA, for example, which was a frustration, again, for me representing business at the time, the approach that was being taken by the CMA. In terms of civil servants, look, even in business, right, in theory, you can theoretically hire and fire people. That's not how it works. You've got to build a team and work together and get goal alignment. I would get goal alignment with civil service by paying everybody who's on the Whitehall payroll against GDP per capita growth.
Okay.
Because at the moment, they get paid regardless.
Yep.
I mean, if the country doesn't grow, if we all get poorer, they still get paid.
Yep.
Get big pensions and all the rest of it. So just to drive some goal alignment and to improve the focus of Whitehall or Westminster on GDP per capita, I would put everyone's money where their mouth is. No doubt including ministers, but that wouldn't be my say, and only pay people against that rather than against inflation.
Yeah, they would kick off about that, I'd assume, wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, this government tells us how we're going to be growing wonderfully quickly. So if that is the case, then no one should be worrying about it. But is the bigger point? I mean, it's a tactical one.
Yeah, of course.
The bigger point is actually trying to get people all pointing in the same direction.
What about the EU? So obviously the current government is proud of the fact that it's growing closer to Brussels. And if you're back in government, are you gonna try and retain that close relationship, or are there ways you would pare it back slightly? I mean, how would you disentangle from that?
To continue listening to this interview, become a member now by heading over to order-order.com.